All right, what's up, YouTube? Obviously, not the normal recording environment, but out of town at the moment and recording everything from my laptop, so it might not be the best quality. If the audio is a little off, I apologize ahead of time for that. If the video is a little off, try my best. So, cut me a little bit slack. I know y'all would rather have like a subpar video than no video, so this is what we got for you today. So I ran through a league. I think it was my first league since Bloomborough dropped, which obviously you can tell I've got 0 copies of any Bloomborough cards whatsoever in my 75. And that's partially for 2 reasons. One, I don't think the power level of Bloomborough is off the bat high enough for what I would consider like modern playable. There's a few cool cards here and there. Mockingbird's cool. There's a couple new black removal spells that are pretty all right. But all in all, like, there's no major changes for the most part to any of the shadow builds. I know a lot of people have been hyped about Mockingbird, which I even found like a little local shop that had a couple. So I ended up buying a couple paper copies. So you better believe we'll try it at some point. But I do think that the card is cool, but it falls into this kind of trap of like, oh yeah, having a flying shadow is cool, but just having your first shadow like live is also cool. So Mockingbird's kind of this card in that Teamer Battle Rage style that depends on having another creature alive and like being around when Mockingbird resolves, and that's a big liability. So it's not a card that I'm hugely interested in, but again, we will try it off at some point. But when I was getting back into my first league since the Bloomborough release, I just kind of wanted to go with Old Faithful, and that's what we got on screen here. Dimir Shadow recently. I've been 5 or 6 cards here and there, like this particular iteration, trying to clean up the creature base a little bit. 4 Frog, 4 Nether Goyf, 4 Shadow, 4 Wraith if you want to count those. But you'll notice no Tamiyo. The reason being is with so much energy running around, Tamiyo's not great into the energy matchup with Flage and Galvanic Discharge. Less so Static Prison, but like Guide of Souls, making everything big enough to attack through Tamiyo. It's just not a very impactful card in that particular matchup. And with that one being so popular, you kind of have to make some main board considerations, assuming you're going to see it at some point during most leagues. So that's why I have no Tamiyo in this list. I've been trying out Psychic Frog a lot more. I'll leave the league to let you know how it does or how it doesn't do, so you can make your judgment based off that. I don't want to give too many preconceived notions. The 4 Fatal Push, 1 Bloodchief's Thirst, that 5th 1-mana interactive spell, really good into the energy matchups. The 2 Go for the Throat. Clean answer to Flage, clean answer to opposing Murktides, to Shieldred out of mono black, to any creature out of energy or any of the other creature matchups. And since Urza's Saga has been on a really big decline, not as many construct tokens running around that you have to deal with. Otherwise, 3 Stub and a Spell Snare. Couple Sink into Stupor, 4 Counterspell, and then you will notice I've got 3 Preordain, which seems a little weird. The reason there is I wanted to find room for the 3rd Stubborn Denial and didn't really want to cut any of my other interactive spells. I feel pretty good about like my removal package. The 4 Counterspells, wanted to make sure I kept the Spell Snare in there. So ended up cutting the Preordain just kind of on the basis that I want all of this other interaction on turn 1 to help me kind of bridge into a Psychic Frog on turn 2, or just like a decent Nether Goyf. And Preordain is just kind of like the weakest thing to be doing on turn 1. You really want Preordain if you're land light on turn 1, or you want it like turn 3 or something if you're looking for a threat. But it's never the play you want to make over something like Thought Seizing or Fatal Pushing an opposing creature, maybe even getting out another Goyf. So that's the reason for the 3 Preordain. Let's go ahead and, well, I guess sideboard. Single copy of Force and Negation, great against like unfair stuff like Eldrazi, against a lot of the Storm variants running around. 2 Stern Scolding, 3 Consign to Memory, 3 Toxic Deluge, 3 or 4 Break the Ice, 2 Unlicensed Hearse. Hearse has really been like an all-star card for me out of the sideboard. A lot of people are on Surgical Extraction for Flage, but I really hate the idea of like letting the Flage come down, hit you, and then you surgical it, and that's it. Like you 1-for-1 their 3 damage that hopefully didn't remove anything, but just like 1-for-1ing a Flage. And it makes it so that priority opportunities off of things like the Surveil lands or Fable of the Mirror Breaker can be awkward. With Unlicensed Hearse, you can keep them off of the graveyard capacity to get back Flage in the first place, which is really nice. And then if they don't see Flage, then you can crew up the Hearse and actually like attack in with a reasonably sized threat. Whereas Surgical, if they don't see Flage, you have to either take the chance to surgical something else and hope it's impactful, or just like hang on to that dead surgical and see what happens. And it's just not really like a play pattern I'm particularly thrilled about. So let's go ahead and hop in. Unfortunately, I think the recording captured the cursor originally. Like I said, since I'm on my laptop, everything's from one screen. So if there's a little bumbling around getting the recording straight, then I apologize about that. I don't think I can pause without like bringing up the whole little video menu. Either way, game 1, match 1 on the play with Thoughtseize into Psychic Frog with Spell Snare, Counterspell backup. Really can't ask for much more. It's kind of got everything we want. It's got interaction on 1, a threat pseudo card advantage. So pretty easy keep. And it kind of skips through here, so we'll stop. We Thoughtseize, see double Underworld Cookbook, double Asmo, Generosant, Malevolent Rumble, Urza Saga, Verdant Catacombs. So, or single Underworld Cookbook. So really good opening hand for our opponent. We can take the cookbook to remove their first way of discarding. Unfortunately, the Int cycle does give them a second avenue to discard to get down an Asmo. So taking the cookbook's not perfect, but it always leaves the opportunity to maybe top deck another Thoughtseize and get to take the Generous Int. Maybe we want to Spell Snare the Rumble, but I'm more inclined to just like take them off their turn 1 play, which is the cookbook. That way I can play out the Frog on 2. Maybe they go cycle Int, Asmo, and I can counterspell the cookbook on 3. But either way, just kind of interested in getting down the Frog on an empty board with no play out of them on turn 1. Mortuary flips over another Mortuary. So yeah, like we assume, they go for the Int cycle to get down the Asmo. But we've got a Frog. So you will notice that like I decide to bobble myself and play off my fetch land Wraith instead of like holding those cards to discard the Frog. And the reason there is if I find a Fatal Push, I'd rather just like Fatal Push the Asmo and attack and be really mana efficient. but because I didn't see a fatal push on top, I'm just attacking in, preparing to discard like Wraith, Spell, Snare if they block, and then counterspell the cookbook and hopefully strand the second Asmo in hand. But instead we just find more counterspells. We do find the fatal push, so that's about as good as I can ask for. Spell, Snare, Rumble, counter cookbook, just to kind of keep this Asmo on board, really not doing anything. They've got a fatal push coming off the top. Stub is a huge pickup for us. So they went for a Traverse the Ovenwald there. I honestly didn't think about Grist. I was kind of thinking about, they just traverse for like another Saga or something, and figured that was a little too slow. So I just let the Traverse resolve to save my stub. But then they got Grist, and I was like, oh, well, that could be problematic. Thankfully, I've got a big Shadow and a Frog that's drawn me a couple cards, so not the end of the world. Counterspell there means we can double discard, fly over with Frog, or push and attack him with Shadow. Either one. Sideboarding. So this is like black-green Asmo food. Sideboarding. Not bringing in the Stern Scoldings because they don't hit anything really. Maybe if they play like some little Academy Manufacturer type card, I could see Stern Scolding, but against just Asmo, no. Trimming on Go for the Throat because of Saga tokens. Trimming on Street Wraith. Trimming on Thoughtseize because Thoughtseize isn't really good into like Urza Saga matchups, and especially against a deck that's kind of getting value from discarding anyway. I'd rather just be more interaction. I brought in Consign to Memory to counter Cookbook and to counter the search trigger off of Urza Saga. I brought in Unlicensed Hearse for the Yard and a couple copies of Break the Ice. Usually Break the Ice is like my bring in if I don't have enough stuff to bring in and it's got some sort of relevant target. I don't just auto bring in Break the Ice if they're on like Urza Saga. Sideboard. Opening hand, no lands. Easy ship. Second hand, 3 lands plus a sink, double Frog, and a push. So we'll just throw back a third land. Hope we get to interact with this push early and land a Frog on maybe an empty board. I am finding myself questioning lines a lot more often when it comes to Undercity Sewers. So here I played out the fetch because I was like, if they don't do anything, I want to go get Undercity Sewers. But then I kind of had the thought of like, well, what if they play something that I want to fatal push? What if they go discard Asmo and I want to be mana efficient and push? That means I like lose access to my sewers with this hand, which isn't the end of the world, but it's not optimal. So I probably in this spot need to start just shocking in Watery Grave on turn 1 and saving the Polluted Delta. I can always get Island on 2 if I want to save life. But either way, I'm going to filter away a Flooded Strand. Go ahead and jam down a Frog. Kind of feel like they have interaction there. But if they use their interaction on the Frog there, then I get to untap and like Thoughtseize plus Frog next turn or something. And I'm pretty sure these lists only run 1 copy of Grist. So the odds are kind of low that they've got it. Here we take the Fatal Push. Leave them with the Traverse. They do end up traversing for an Asmo. which is annoying but fine. Fly the frog over for a point, break the ice, the Urza Saga, kill up the token. They do find a way to discard, unfortunately, to get this new Asmo down, but got Fatal Push, and they're just making food. I will say Psychic Frog and Stub aren't the best of friends. So they end up, I don't think you can see it in the graveyard, they end up finding a Life from the Loam and are getting back Saga off Life from the Loam, which is kind of interesting. And then I guess I could have talked about that last turn a little bit more. All right, so they ditch the Shadow Spear, go to my turn. I draw this Shadow. I don't really care about playing out the Shadow as a 1/1, so I'm just going to use it for the extra counter on Frog to speed up the clock I already have. Draw into another Shadow. Again, not playing it out as a 1/1, but it does give me the ability to ditch to the Frog, grow the Frog to a 4/5, and enable Stubborn Denial. So now, since all they've got is like make a clue or make a construct or crack a food. They can't do both. If they crack a food, I just attack in for lethal. If they make a construct, then I can discard whatever I draw and fly over with the frog. On to match number 2. Again, on the play. Really good opening hand. Turn 1, Fatal Push. Turn 2, Frog. Counterspell backup after that. You could cycle Street Wraith on turn 1 looking for, ironically enough, the Thoughtseize. Would not fault anybody for that, but usually I kind of take the conservative line of, I'm not going to cycle Wraith and Shock and everything on turn 1 in the blind unless I have a hand that can really take advantage of that life loss, like 1 or 2 shadows. Pause on this Thoughtseize. Get to the right spot. Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, their hand was absolutely stacked. They got third land, so even if I take the Trawler, they have the Takenuma. They've got Fatal Push for a thread. I can take Soul Spike, but they've got double Necro Dominance, and they're at 20 life, so, like, they'll find more Soul Spikes. Then I end up just, like, playing Frog, and they kill me immediately after. So we go to game 2. Against Mono Black Necro. You can't really do much against a hand like that. We didn't have a quick enough clock. If we had cycled that Street Wraith on turn 1, found the Thoughtseize, then maybe that that game ends up being a little different. But we still didn't have an answer to double Necro, so I'm not gonna like beat myself up over it. Sideboarding, bringing out some pushes, bringing out a Bloodchief's Thirst. The reason I'm taking out Push is I still have Go for the Throat in the deck, and that lets me kill Grief or Shieldred or whatever without needing Revolt. I've still got a couple Thoughtseizes, but I don't really want to keep a bunch in against like a Grief Mirror or Grief deck hand disruption mirror. And then I board out Spell Snare because I think all it really hits is Bowmaster. Maybe some Shieldred's Edict or something, but bringing in Stern Scolding for Grief, for Bowmaster, for the Trawler, anything like that. Bringing in Force of Negation is another answer to Necro, and Consigned to Memory because it counters the One Ring, it counters the instep trigger for Necro, and then it counters ETB triggers on things like Bowmasters. So it's got a little usefulness. You can also use it, well, I won't spoil it because it ends up coming up. So turn one, just throw out a Nether Goyf here. And this is like a really good supporting argument for Nether Goyf, is you can just play it out turn one in matchups like this, because if they do fatal push it, then I have a chance to bring it back in a few turns. If they don't fatal push it, then I go ahead and start clocking on turn two. And if they do end up using some sort of removal, like it takes that removal away from Shadow, and I'm really like not down anything, keep a stub on top. All right, let's get to Stern Scolding of Grief. Entire reason we brought that card in. So that play right there, assuming they had the Grief turn one, maybe they had the Undying effect, that kind of screams to me like they've got two Undying effects, and they're planning on scamming the Grief plus holding up another piece of interaction for it. It's kind of a real specific read, but that's just the gut feeling. Bowmaster, don't really care about. If they want to like double block or something, I can push the Bowmaster. If they have an Undying effect, I can stub it, or I can just like sink into Stupor the token. And then now that Shadow's out of Bowmaster range, we'll play it out. Our Trawler's fine. Not going to waste interaction on things that like don't really matter. I still feel like they've got an Undying effect. Everything's just kind of been like with a mana open, refusing to use that mana. Malakir Rebirth, so we'll push off the Bowmaster and get the damage in. Sell the Profane my Shadow. Thoughtseize away their Dolthy, and now I've got Nether Goyf, Counterspell, Consign if they find like a one ring. And now we are winning even through something like Shieldred, so good deal. On to game three. I'm pretty sure that whole there's some random background noise. I feel like that whole consign line I brought up earlier shows up in this game, so hoping that's the case. Inquisition away my Psychic Frog. That's okay. We've got some interaction. Could play out a 1/1 Shadow here, but I don't want to play out a 1/1 Shadow into the Bowmaster deck. I know I've got Stern Scolding, but it's just not really like a play I need to force myself to make. Like I've got all this permission. I can be a little more passive and try to pick a spot where maybe I can play out double Shadow, hold up double Counterspell. One might get killed, but I save the other and then like untap with 3 Counterspells or something. Not fighting over the Bowmaster. I'm surprised they ping themselves instead of pinging the shadow, but each their own. Inquisition away my other shadow, which is fine because like my entire game plan now is just protect this one shadow. And I don't really care about the other. Then okay attacking in, because if they attack back, if they like say no blocks and attack back, I'm winning that race pretty handedly. So this is the line I was talking about. So when your opponent uses like an undying effect on a creature and that creature goes to the graveyard, it creates a trigger. Well, consigned to memory says counter triggered ability. So you have the option here to counter that Bowmaster trigger after the Bowmaster's off the battlefield, so they can't like hit it with another undying effect or something. It's really good little interaction to know about. Third copy of Bowmasters. They tap out for March. I'll go ahead and use up that stub. Definitely don't want to shield Druid around. So we know they've got a Bowmaster and 2 unknowns. So their other unknowns are Grief and Necro. Decide to take the Necro, leave them with the Bowmaster and the Grief. If they want to hard cast like the Grief, I can counter spell. They end up going for the Grief. We can sign the trigger to... they ditch the Bowmaster to evoke the Grief. Consign the trigger to let them look at my hand, because if their last card's an undying effect, I can just counter spell it. Since it's not, I get to save my counter spell, which looks really good into this second copy of Shieldred here. And top deck Exploited Delta. I should have just gotten the Undercity Sewers. I know. Y'all can roast me in the comments for that. Yes. A 1 ring. So bobble myself, see a Psychic Frog. I gotta bobble myself and draw, because if there's a chance I hit a counter spell, I need it. The ring counter is up to 2 with my shadow being pushed. Not a great spot to be in. Do you get to Stern Scolding? Up, 3. I mean, I'm sure everybody out there knows where I'm going with this counter, so it'll all make sense momentarily. Hardcast out the Street Wraith, because I might as well have another threat on board. So all 4 copies of the ring in what, a 2, 4, 6, like 8 card window there. Thankfully, all these rings have just been like draw 1, and eventually they can't keep up. So we are able to take game 3 against Mono Black, which brings us to match number 3 against our Discord friend Hummingbird. So on the draw, match number 3. Was not expecting a Grief deck. They've been playing a lot of like black-white base shadow recently. So that's kind of what I was thinking I was going to run into, but instead we get Grief scammed on 1. We get horribly betrayed here by our bobble. I want to bobble them, so if they have a Bowmaster, I go ahead and get the draw out of the way. Unfortunately, that bobble betrays me because I see second land plus Fatal Push. I need the Fatal Push for the Grief. I need the second land for the Revolt. And that means I'm drawing it into the Thoughtseize deck, and they end up having the answer there. So, fun times, fun times. Policies counterspell on top of their library. We can get a frog down here, so hopefully they don't have a follow-up to this grief. Like maybe no removal spell for the frog, and we can get in a little bit of damage, maybe find some piece of interaction for the grief. But nope, we're getting Murktided. Okay, well, the last card's counterspell. We're in a bit of a rough spot. I take the Nether Goyf, bottom the push. I don't have Revolt to get rid of the grief anyway, so the push doesn't really do me any good. I can hop the frog without shrinking the Nether Goyf at all, so go ahead and do that. Get a block in, and then my only hope here is that like I can play out a second Psychic Frog, counterspell, or summon out their counterspell, and maybe find a removal spell for the grief, like a Go for the Throat, and get in a lethal attack next turn. It's not a high likelihood, but non-zero. And then this was just like a complete... I don't think I was winning this game anyway, but definitely a bit of a brain fart on my part. I completely forgot that they had a card in hand. I was looking at like the frog in play and 2 cards in the graveyard, and it's like, okay, well they can't exile 3 and grow the Murktide. But then I saw this activation of the frog and was like, oh wait, they had a card in hand. So yeah, they're able to discard to the frog, activate it to give the frog flying, pump up the Murktide by a couple points, and that's enough for lethal. So yeah, just me not noticing they had a card in hand. Either way, like I said, I don't think I was winning that one anyway, so I'm not going to feel too terrible about it. Game 2, we're on the play, bringing in Unlicensed Hearse, bringing in Stern Scolding, taking out some Wraiths, taking out a Thoughtseize. So yeah, two Hearse, 2 Stern Scolding for 3 Wraith and a Thoughtseize. Pretty good hand on the play. We've got Nether Goyf we can just throw out turn 1. Same thing as that mono black matchup. Like, might as well just throw out the Nether Goyf. I could have led on the Sink into Stupor to stop them from being able to Thoughtseize it, but honestly, I like just having the threat down, so I'm not going to feel too terrible about that choice. They do have Blood Chief's Thirst. Glad to see that tech is kind of catching on a little bit. Not much to do, but hey, if we find a second land, we've got plenty of action. Not interested in fighting over cantrips. I do have the Go for the Throat, so if they are able to find a Murktide pretty quickly, I've got some interaction to deal with that. If they have a Bowmaster to try to get an extra trigger into my draw, I can Fatal Push the Bowmaster. I'm not like hugely interested in doing so. Alright, so their hand's pretty terrible, thankfully. Just a couple Not Dead After Alls, a Sink into Stupor, a Fatal Push. We do find the second land, so feeling a lot better now. We just kind of need to start jamming stuff into whatever they got. So double Not Dead, Grief on board. Top deck a Hearse, which is absolutely amazing here, because that means that we can like go for the kill spell on the Grief, and even if they hit it with an Undying effect, we can kill it while it's in the graveyard. Or we can exile it while it's in the graveyard so it doesn't come back. And opponent scoops to that. So I'm guessing their hand was that second Not Dead After All and just something dead third, or in the third card slot. On to game number 3. Definitely a really fun matchup. I don't think I've played against a Goyf Murktide variant. I know we've played one on stream before, but I don't think I've played against it. See a fatal push off of our bobble. I decide because they're on the mulligan, I'm just gonna like go ahead and try to hit the Thoughtseize here. Like try to protect my fatal push from a counter spell or something. I don't really want to pass to their turn, draw the fatal push, fetch, and then them just have like a spell pierce or something and blow me out. So instead, just give an extra turn, play the slow game. Opponent misses their land drop again, so trying to sneak this hearse in under a counter spell. No counter spell, no spell snare, dodges fatal push. And it is kind of funny because, like I said, Hummingbard, great friend in the Discord. And I was chatting with them through part of this match. We were like laughing about Thoughtseize bugs going on. And they mentioned that they drew Murktides like right after I top decked this hearse. So the timing was just absolutely perfect. And then we're just trying our best to keep them off of any potential Murktide. Get down Frog. If we can find like one card to discard to Frog, then it'll actually let us crew up the hearse and enable Stubborn Denial that way. And then again, really hot draw there. I 100% told Bard in the Discord afterwards, like, I drew so extraordinarily well, especially that game 3, that I feel pretty bad for winning that one. I made no meaningful decisions. I just drew everything I needed. But either way, 3-0 on to match 4. On the play, another really good Frog hand. Jam out our Nether Goyf on 1. Hopefully soak up some removal so our Frog can come down on 2. If not, then I can always discard some stuff like this to the Frog to get a little extra damage in. I figured Scalding Tarn meant I'm up against some sort of red-based removal deck, so ditching the instant there, the extra removal spell, means I can ditch the sorcery and grow the Frog, or grow the Nether Goyf even more, or like grow both outside of bolt range or galvanic discharge range if I needed. So this was just like super smooth tempo win for Nether Goyf and Frog. Like, all right, so Lotus Field, Dream Script there means we know we're up against Twiddle Storm. I'd never seen this deserted temple before, so that was probably a giveaway, but just not one that I recognized. But that was excellent game showing for Nether Frog, or yeah, I'm going to call it Nether Frog, that Nether Goyf into Frog combo. Sideboarding against Twiddle Storm. I'm not going to lie, I had to Google a deck list just to see what they had. And the only creature in the 75 was Vizier of Tumbling Sands. So end up cutting all the Fatal Pushes and the Go for the Throats and the Bloodsheath's Thirst. Boarded in Force Negation, boarded in a Hearse. A couple copies of Break the Ice just because I needed more things to bring in. So I figured if I get to hit a Deserted Temple with one of those, then it's not the end of the world. It's not great. It's not optimal. It's not my plan 1, but when you got to cut all these removal spells, like you got to bring something in. Another really good Nether Goyf hand. This is one of the things I've really liked out of like these Nether Goyf builds of Shadow, is you get these great opening hands with just a lot of things that you have available to do. And if they culminate in like a filtering your hand plus getting a threat down and following that threat up with interaction, it's really difficult for a lot of decks to contend with. But you see a hand like this, and I think you can also understand why I've been so high on Tamiyo in these lists. With like Baubles and Wraith and Preordain. Super easy to flip Tamiyo on turn 2. So every time you see Psychic Frog, you kind of have to think to yourself, well, what if this was a Tamiyo instead? Would I be winning? Would I be doing better in like some worse matchups? Okay, so decided to go for the Sink into Super on their Sink into Super here, mostly to be mana efficient. It just so happens they had like a not very strong hand, but just like a Wish and a Strict Serenade that doesn't counter my counter spells. So they didn't have a very strong hand, but I just wanted them to like waste their entire turn on Sink into Supering or getting their Sink synced, and then I could untap with like Counterspell and another piece of interaction instead of counterspelling the Sink and untapping with like a Sink that may not matter. Because if they did find a Lotus Field like they did, then they might just make enough mana to get around Sink. So this is match number 5 for the trophy. We've got a turn 1 Preordain, couple Baubles. Opponent commercialized districts over a Strike It Rich, so we know they're on Storm, which is notoriously a pretty good matchup for us. So that's a really big positive. Unfortunately, our hand is not great. We do need a couple extra land drops to really take advantage of all the cards we got available to us. But with them down to just 2 cards in hand, or like this Rinse Resolve into, I think, double Ruby Medallion, they've got a lot of ways to reduce mana, but as long as I can kind of focus on the payoffs, then I could be okay. Thankfully, we find a second land. They have no payoffs in hand. So all they have right now is a bunch of mana reduction, but they don't have... they're not actually doing anything with all that mana reduction. Then Moto kind of skips out here, but they end up Reckless Impulsing into... what was it? Like a Past in Flames... and Past in Flames and something else that didn't matter, and ended up scooping to that. I was kind of surprised by the scoop, but I guess they thought like because I found my second land, I probably had all action in hand, which is pretty accurate. So I could untap and go for the Throat the Rowl, or just like hold up Counterspell, get down Frog, whatever. But yeah, like I said, they ended up scooping to that. Kind of fizzled pretty bad on those Rinse Resolves. Either way, go to game 2. Sideboarding, fairly similar to Twiddle Storm, except end up keeping in a few more Fatal Pushes as answers to Rowl, not bringing in Break the Ice. Boarded out a Psychic Frog. It's like, I don't really want to jam a 2-mana threat on turn 2 and just tap out there. But I do think this matchup is fairly favorable for our side. So always happy to see it. Especially when you get to be mana efficient, just like interact with things like the Rowl. But Consigned to Memory, great answer for the Ruby Medallions. Also can hit a Storm trigger in a pinch, though most of the time you're not really losing to, or losing in a way that countering a Storm trigger matters. Because usually at that point they've got enough mana to where they can just like flash back a Past in Flames and cast another one. Orum's Chant. Have to counter the Orum's Chant, because obviously if I don't, they can follow it up with something like Ritual Effect, and I fall too far behind. There's nothing I can really do. But if I let the Orms, or if I counter the Orms chant with a stubborn denial to interact with any like ritual following it up, I can hopefully stop them from chaining off here. We kind of talked about it before, the rule of 2 against Storm, where all of their impactful spells are 2 mana. So being able to fight over one of the 2 mana spells here means I can effectively stop their entire turn. Anamorphose is fine. I want to keep my counterspell for some sort of a payoff, for like a wish, for a Ral, Past in Flames. Speak of the Past in Flames, devil. I also will say that first Unlicensed Hearse activation was a misclick. I should have hit 2 spells. I accidentally hit the Sacred Foundry, or the Sunbaked Canyon. And I got punished because they had a Past in Flames in hand. But I didn't get punished because I'm playing Blue-Black Shadow, and yeah, they're going to have a tough time beating us with that anyway. No good follow-up to the Manamorphose, and again, like, I just need to find a threat. Thank you. And now we can start trying to turn the corner. I don't crew up the Hearse and attack there because the Hearse attack doesn't really matter. It doesn't change the clock. I would have been dealing 6 and then 6 and then still needed another attack. So it's 3 turns regardless. So if I just leave up the Hearse activation in case something goes awry and they have another copy of Past in Flames or something, and attack with the Nether Goyf, then I can crew up the Hearse the next 2 turns, have the same clock, but have a turn of Hearse activation. They're definitely stubbing the Glimpse because I do not want my opponent to have all of those tokens. And if I sink into Super It, they can just recast it and get a bunch of chump blockers. And we need them to not have chump blockers. Then again, like attacking with Nether Goyf instead of Hearse, because the Hearse isn't lethal, so they can just take it. And I would just be tapping myself off of a Hearse activation for no reason. Escape into the Wilds, one I've never seen out of Storm before, so we'll sink that. Effectively time walk them, and now we can attack with the Hearse because it does force the chump block with the Ral. Could have kept the Thoughtseize. I probably should have kept the Thoughtseize and just gone like Thoughtseize the Escape the Wilds and Thoughtseize the Escape the Wilds and force the block with the Ral. Yeah, definitely should have. I was kind of thinking like, oh, they cast Escape the Wilds and it just takes up their entire turn. But they ended up hitting like a Ritual and a Manamorphose and something else. I was like, oh, well, that could have been really bad. So there you go. Nice little trophy league with Dimir Shadow. Frog looked good. Not going to lie. Nether Goyf looked good. All the threats looked good, honestly. There were a couple spots where getting down a Shadow early was a little tough. But at the end of the day, it's still like a 1-mana 6/6 half the time. And that's phenomenal. Didn't really miss the 4th Preordain, but I'll probably just throw it back in for consistency's sake. Out of the sideboard, Unlicensed Hearse has still been an MVP. Absolutely loving that card. Consign's been great. Yeah, not a whole lot to say. If you've been following the videos for a minute, you kind of know what the list looks like, and honestly, not too many changes. So that's what we're rolling with. Otherwise, hope y'all enjoyed this video. Thanks so much for stopping by, hanging out, and seeing what's going on. Hope y'all have a fantastic rest of your day. Stay safe. Enjoy some good food and company. I will catch y'all back live later. Adios for now.